All right. So, good morning, everyone. Thanks a lot for joining us today. My name is Nicola Rustignoli. I'm co-CEO of the Scion Association, and we are the non-for-profit overseeing the Scion technology. As being the face of Scion, we get a question a lot. How much does it cost to deploy Scion? What is the return of this investment? So for us, being a member-based organization, we sat together with our members, and we are now able to put concrete numbers behind the value that Scion delivers and its ROI. This is the result of a joint effort, and it follows the publication of a white paper that you can find on our website, scion.org. This work was facilitated by us, Scion Association, together with our member six, Eraneos and Anapaya. Since launching our white paper, on the business benefits, one of the reaction that we heard a lot is maybe this sounds too good to be true. That's exactly why we are here today. We have all the experts behind the research. We will walk you through the methodology, all the assumptions that led us to the data and its key findings. So I'm very pleased to be joined today by Fritz Steinmann, infrastructure domain architect at SIX, Adrian Anderegg, partner at Eraneos, and Martin Bosshardt, CEO of Anapaya. I would like to, first of all, thank them all for their contribution in this work. All right, then let's get started. So when it comes to cybersecurity and connectivity, this has become so critical for us, for our society, that we really have to think about how we do it, what is the supply chain behind our critical connectivity. And if you look at the existing spaces of solution, you typically have two options as an enterprise. On one hand, you have lease lines that are typically inflexible, especially when you are connecting more than one party, and typically you are locked into a single telco. On the other hand, you have internet-based solutions like SD-WAN and VPN, but once again, you might be locked into a single solution, and most importantly, you are as good as the underlying internet. SD-WAN relies on the internet, and that means that the boxes themselves are exposed to an incredible attack surface. And this is especially true with the latest AI developments that actually led to a continuous series of vulnerabilities being discovered in edge products. Scion is a technology that sits in the middle. It provides really the best of both worlds. You do have the flexibility of internet-based solutions like SD-WAN, but this is really with the security and properties that you get on lease line. And this while providing really optionality at the network layer. When we look deeper at the Scion technology, it really has some really unique selling points. First of all, Scion was designed through many years of research to build trust really deep into the protocol. So the technology is really secure by design, and that is what helps Scion to achieve a much smaller attack surface. Path security is a fundamental part of Scion. So as a Scion user, you can control the full path where your data is traveling. So that means no hijacking, but that also means that as a user, you have optionality. You have a choice where your data is going, and that means that you can create use cases such as geofencing. Maybe you need sovereignty for your workloads. Well, Scion provides exactly that. And this is all built not on a single backbone, not on a single MPLS, but really by a federation of telcos that join forces together through Scion to create a high resilient, enterprise ready paper. We introduce two typical use cases. The first one is an enterprise one connectivity scenario, which includes two in-depth scenarios. This was developed by the Eraneos team. And so here we look at the cost of replacing MPLS and private lines or SD-WAN with Scion. The second case is on remote access connectivity, and this was led by Anapaya. This will focus on their gate product, and here we looked at how much it costs to add this defense and what is the return on the investment. All these cost and benefit analysis were based on real-world customer examples that have been anonymized for the purpose of the study. But of course, these results shouldn't be interpreted as a fixed model. The pricing that is used through the analysis is based also on estimates from the Swiss market provider. So if you are connecting from another geography, keep in mind that there might be some adjustments depending on the local pricing of your market. And of course, costs in the end depend on service provider, region, network architecture, and enterprise-specific requirements. I'm now very pleased to hand this over to Adrian Anderegg, who will walk us through the Enterprise One use case.
Thank you, Nicola. As Eraneos, we consult our clients to select the best solution for their needs. So we come on from the needs, and this often includes, among many other topics, also how to design and implement network connectivity. To make costs in this white paper as tangible as possible, we used two scenarios, which we also see as real-world scenarios among our clients. We designed the network patterns as realistic as possible and also included costs, which we saw recently while accompanying tenders in the market. So they are supposed to be as close to your scenarios, your reality as possible. Nevertheless, in the end, it's a model. You can always discuss about one or the other figure. Your setup or your requirements might slightly look different. You can negotiate cheaper prices. That's also possible, of course. Nevertheless, we think the model and the overall figures are robust. And so sensitivity, especially on the payback, is rather low, but we come to that in a minute. The first scenario you see here, you can imagine maybe a production company having a headquarter and 6 production sites, factories, where you require a reliable connections towards your headquarter, for instance, to have technical drawing always available for machinery. But you could also imagine a public institution, for instance, a canton, having a data center, 6 remote departments distributed among your canton or the city. So that might make it feel a bit more tangible. Today, in such a scenario, you require high availability. So either you use private lines as a primary connection, backed up redundancy, mostly not with a second private line, but using MPLS, or in solution 2, you could implement this completely based on a redundant MPLS network. Or as a potential solution 3, you can use Scion, relying on internet connectivity, laying over Scion network on top of that. And this is also assumption in the model, also having the same availability patterns, because internet rather robust, you need a reliable, high available internet connectivity. And then we also see from existing network that availability service levels are the same or even better than we see with private lines. So we calculated through all of these. I guide you briefly through. In solution 1, you require at the end 6 leased lines dedicated point to point from the sites to your headquarter or data center, and you add on redundancy for all those 7 sites with an MPLS connection. A leased line around 50k Swiss francs per month. An MPLS connection we see in the market around 5,000 Swiss francs per month. So all over this scenario ends up with 1.5 million for the whole setup per year. We could use not leased lines, but MPLS for everything. So in the second scenario on the next slide, we calculated also that one. Here you have 14 connections to an MPLS network. These are a bit cheaper because you get sizing, so it's not 5k but 4.4k per month. So replacing the dedicated lines with an MPLS network for this scenario, you end up with around 740,000 Swiss francs per year. So now looking up this scenario into Scion, what we need is redundant connectivity. So we have 7 times 2, so 14 redundant Scion connections. Here we calculate this 235,000 per month. And we also need certain Scion equipment, licensed around 500 Swiss francs per month. You need a isolation domain. Here we assume a shared fee you get from a provider per site, and all this ends up in around 140,000 Swiss francs per year to implement, to connect these 7 sites onto a private and isolated network among each other with rather high redundancy. So we assume the same 99.99 SLAs, SLAs, 24/7 support on the connection, and to have it comparable with the previous scenarios. Obviously, also installing Scion costs something. Here we said, and that comes from references we have in the SSFN domain. Obviously, you need to go to every site, you need to install the equipment, you need to configure, test, migrate everything, around 45,000 Swiss francs project costs. So you have on the one side a rather high, or lower costs per year compared to a project one-time costs. So the ROI in this scenario, which we can calculate, so payback period on the next slide, you see is very fast. So because the cost per year per month are so much lower, then these one-time costs of 50K with 54K are paid back within no time. So that's one scenario. We also looked into a different one. The concept of a service company. You can imagine some medium-sized retail with shops, or you could think of maybe a health insurance with a headquarter and certain branches, and the central data center. We also qualified here. We have large sites, we have medium-sized sites, and a certain amount of small sites. Typically, what we see here, an SD-WAN today applied to connect among these. You can also replace this scenario with Scion. So when calculate that through on the SD-WAN, you see on the next slide costs of, well, depending on the site, because we introduced different availabilities depending on the size of the site. So the headquarter has redundant lines, data center obviously as well. We have the large sites where we reduced the service level a bit, medium-sized again slightly lower, covering 6 days, and smaller sites only business hours on working days. You need a certain encryption layer on top of it for the SD-WAN, and all that sums up to roughly 1 million for the network connectivity. Compared to Scion, we again have for all the sites connectivity. Here we also lowered availability requirements for the medium and small sites. You again need Scion Edge devices for all the sites, and there is a certain fee for your isolation domain. And when you calculate that together, yearly costs are 650,000. So also installing costs something around 100K, but already here you can see the lower costs per year and not so high one-off costs sums up to a payback period which is a bit higher than before, but already still very low, on the next slide with 4 months to cover the one-off costs. So given the model, the assumptions in the model, we see a very competitive prices. So Scion here can really, from a financial perspective, compete with be it SD1 or even more on a leased line or MPLS scenario. So this is the first in the one environment, but we also looked into a case on more on remote access connectivity. For that, and over.
All right, thanks a lot, Adrian. I guess we can now move to the next use case, which is focusing on remote access connectivity. And I'm very pleased to hand this over to Martin Bosshardt, CEO of Anapaya, who will go through this use case.
Thank you so much. And yes, it is always a challenge to calculate the costs in detail. And it's very exciting to see that these new solutions are already extremely cost effective. So thank you, Adrian, for that research. Obviously, this was a big work and very exciting to see, because next to resiliency and better performance on the network, it is also very much about security. It's a way to isolate from the classic internet architecture using the same infrastructure. So that's very cost effective. And at the same time, we can reduce the attack surface by almost 100%, because these devices are no longer attackable from the internet. And that's obviously a huge value. So if we go to the next slide, we see that these attacks are currently growing tremendously. And obviously, when you think how many 0 days do we remember, let's say 10 years ago, how many exploits do we remember on 0 days, that has been very minor. And now with AI-driven cyber attacks, we see a tremendous acceleration in very sophisticated and very fast attacks. So to find vulnerabilities became easy with AI, and at the same time to exploit those vulnerabilities became very easy and much faster. And this is really what the National Cybersecurity Center, NCSC, is confirming, and it is actually concerning. So on the next slide, we see also what the media says, almost one attack a day on critical infrastructure. This is not good, because obviously critical infrastructure used to be independent from the internet, and the exposure to the internet was relatively limited. Now this exposure has been increased over the last couple of years, and the combination now with these AI-driven attacks is extremely dangerous. Also, we see far more effective cases of data extraction, and another very let's say concerning fact in terms of security is the fast growth of IoT devices. These IoT devices are embedded everywhere in our life, and they're relatively cheap in terms of technology, so they're also relatively easy to attack. And very often those IoT devices are then used as an attack vector against the critical infrastructure, especially, for example, if you think charging stations. If you can manipulate charging stations, this can easily then also trigger, let's say, blackouts and bigger disasters in core infrastructure. So on the next slide, we see this perfect storm coming together. Cheap deployment has been deployed. AI is helping to find vulnerabilities, and this is now what we see in terms of worldwide reported 0-day attacks. A 0-day attack is a vulnerability where there is no patch, and obviously this is extremely dangerous because during the 0-day vulnerability, the protection is not really there. It's a pure statistical protection you are facing. Now you could argue, well, okay, we also have much better security products, but the reality is exactly the other way. So the security products become more complex. The security products also become, as a system, more challenging to be managed. And what we face now are also far more zero-day vulnerabilities on the security products, not only because they are more complex, but also because it's much easier to identify those zero-day vulnerabilities. And this is, in a way, quite contradictory what we would think. We see Netscaler, Palo Alto, Cisco. These are the leading products, and they have basically on a monthly basis zero-day vulnerabilities, creating victims then of in the thousands. So we have a couple of thousand victims as a result of those vulnerabilities. And then also we just picked a couple of prominent brands. Obviously, Boeing is not exactly an organization that you would say they do not know how to run security infrastructure. If we look now, what can you do with that? On the next slide. So it basically is just overwhelming situation that we say, okay, cyber attacks are growing, the attacks are becoming more brutal, more accurate, more intense, and on the next slide we see also brutally fast. So a vulnerability, 10th of January 24, a single product, Ivanti remote access, turns into 1,700 corporates compromised within 5 days. This is only possible with a very highly professional organization and very highly automated way to attack and to exploit these kind of vulnerabilities. So if we think what can we do, and that's now where Scion comes into the game on the next slide. In a way, for certain critical application, the only way we see is like you have to isolate from the classic public internet infrastructure when the infrastructure is used for critical applications. And this is also where then the gate came into play. The reference cases we have been seeing, or the business cases we have been looking into, are point-to-point networks. So these point-to-point networks are entirely isolated from the internet. This is very often not possible, for example, for remote access. If you want to do remote access out of a hotel or maybe from a holiday home, you might not have a Scion internet access. So there, the gate infrastructure helps to get connection into the Scion internet, also from autonomous systems where there is not a Scion router installed at your location. So this is reducing the attack surface. It still gives a certain attack vector, but at the same time, we see that attacks directly within an autonomous systems are more or less not happening. So we could not find any attacks in the last 18 months executed based on such a attack vector. That is in theory possible. So if we look into the case now for remote access connectivity, we see we did a reference case based on 800 employees, and we used the cost scenario given by FINMA, where we see that the attack volume is growing by about 25 to 30% per year against the bank. And this obviously generates then certain growing costs on the defense side. And it's now very, let's say, conservative how we calculated those costs based on hardware, software, but also on human costs. This entire study has been done by an independent provider, ScaleRace. They used these different sources of costs driven by the development of the security of the threat vectors in the market. And if you look at the next slide, we see that the cost savings over the coming period, which we are currently seeing is growing pretty drastic, then are introducing a payback time in a very short period of time. So it's not as aggressive as the case we have seen before, but we see a return on investment within about 9 months. So that's on the next slide. This is the summary. Within about 9 months, there is a return on investment, giving the assumption that the infrastructure is used for about 3 years. So obviously, this case is more volatile depending on your infrastructure. So there is a return on investment calculator where you can then bring all your numbers in and calculate your return on investment based on the numbers you have, and it's fascinating then to see how fast you can create a return on investment by simply introducing a gate infrastructure, isolating your critical access from the internet infrastructure by Scion, and therefore then reducing the attack vectors by more than 99%. This results then into far lower costs over time. And what we currently see is a payback definitely below 12 months, but usually 9 months or even lower. So this case was relatively conservative, calculated relatively conservatively to make sure that the numbers are solid. But I would like to invite everybody who is interested in using the return on investment calculator. This is a very powerful tool. It collects then all the relevant data for your specific case and calculates a precise model for your specific application. With this, I would like to hand over for a general summary to Fritz, who was overseeing all these different cases and obviously was instrumental then also in providing fundamental numbers to calculate all those different cases. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin, for this nice handover. Yes, your mileage may vary, of course, in your cases, and this is why I encourage you to go through this ROI calculator to fill in your numbers. And but what we see here on this slide, and if we try to bring it all together, I think it's fair to say that there is one real overarching message. Scion is not just interesting from an engineering point of view and from a technology point of view, but it also is very solid and in many cases surprisingly solid and compelling, a compelling economic position. So what we have done in this work is moving away just from a purely theoretical discussion and instead look at concrete, real-life, real-world use cases. We have asked ourselves a simple question: if organizations were to rethink how they build secure connectivity today, what would be the business impact and what would it actually look like? And the answer across all the scenarios that we looked at is quite consistent. Whenever organizations move away from expensive and fairly rigid connectivity models such as lease lines or MPLS, or focus on one single provider, or even from internet-based approaches that require heavy compensating controls, Scion fundamentally improves both the cost structure and the operational model. Let me illustrate that briefly along the use cases that we looked at. In the Enterprise One scenario, where Scion replaced lease lines, the analysis shows cost reduction of more than 90%. That translates into an ROI of 2,300%, and importantly, a payback time of less than 1 month. So we are not talking about a long-term optimization that takes years to justify. We are talking about something that becomes economically positive almost immediately. Same thing goes with MPLS, with a little lower numbers, but still impressive. We still see around 80% lower yearly costs, very strong ROI, and again, an extremely short payback period. Now, for many organizations, the more realistic baseline today is not MPLS, but SD-WAN. And here the comparison becomes more nuanced because the figures look a bit differently, but still very positive. In the branch networking scenario, Scion delivers roughly a third lower yearly cost, a solid ROI in the range of 200%, and a payback period of just a few months. And most importantly, I think, is the fact that in the SD-WAN case, you're not just relying on a single vendor, or be it in the provider space for the software overlay, or a single provider providing you with the SD-WAN connectivity from one hand. On one hand, this might be compelling because you will only have to deal with one contractual partner. On the other hand, you're just relying then on that sole partner. If you look at the remote access case, which is particularly relevant given the current threat landscape, as Martin outlined, the value creation shifts slightly. There is not only it's not only about replacing connectivity, but also augmenting existing cybersecurity architectures. And by adding Scion Gate there on top of the existing solutions, the organizations achieve meaningful savings through a reduction of attack surface, lower operational complexity, and reduced incident response effort. In the model we presented, that translates into an average annual savings of around 142,000 K with a payback time of under 1 year. If we go to the next slide, then we see the combination of the benefits and then also what we should not forget about the indirect cost. What Scion brings is actually going beyond just the pure business or cost savings. At the business level, it directly supports continuity, meaning your systems stay available, and it strengthens both financial and reputational resilience in the face of growing cyber risks. On operational benefits, it changes how you run your network and your security environment. It improves cybersecurity and cyber resilience at a structural level, not just at the perimeter. It strengthens infrastructure sovereignty and optionality, and it gives organizations much better control over how traffic flows, which is increasingly relevant, especially in regulated environments. From a strategic point of view, this is where it becomes even more interesting. Scion supports regulatory compliance by design, particularly where data locality and path control matter. It reduces dependencies on single vendors because it enables multi-provider architectures out of the box. And it improves how organizations manage third-party risk, which, as you know, has become a major concern across industries. But of course, and this is important, it's not a free transformation. It's not a one thing, all you can eat solution. There is a learning curve. And there is organizational change involved. It's changing the way you operate your business. There is an initial setup and migration effort that needs to be planned and executed carefully. Also, it should not be misunderstood as a replacement for all existing security technologies. You will keep your firewalls for the time being and for quite some time. It is a foundational layer that makes everything above it more efficient because it gives you tools to work with to control your environment. So the right way to think about it is Scion changes the foundation, and by doing so, it allows the rest of the security stack to become more simpler, more robust, more effective, and ultimately more cost effective as well. And this brings me to the final slide. Because we at SIX, together with the Swiss National Bank, have tried to bring it all together and build the Secure Swiss Finance Network, the SSFN. One of the important aspects here is that when moving away from the legacy infrastructure that we had, which was the end-of-life finance IPNet, we wanted to go into a modern architecture and enable any-to-any communication between the parties. Instead of just relying on that centralized hub-based network, we achieve just that with implementing the Scion-based SSFN. What makes this particularly interesting is not just the technology, but the combination of the technology, the governance, and the operating model. From a technical perspective, we have a truly Scion-based, technology-based multi-path communication, so that traffic is not dependent anymore on a single path or provider. This enables very fast failover, which is critical for time-sensitive financial services. From a resilience perspective, this means that even if individual network components fail, whether it is a provider, a link, or an entry point, communication can continue without interruption. From a governance perspective, SSFN is equally strong. Participation is controlled, identities are managed, and there are clear roles about who can connect and how communication takes place. This is not an open internet model. It is a governed, trusted ecosystem. So your use case may vary and differ a bit from the SSFN viewpoint that we actually had. Finally, from a data sovereignty perspective, Scion introduces something that is very difficult to achieve with traditional networking, path control. This means organizations can define and verify which jurisdictions their traffic crosses. In case of SSFN, it's of course mostly Switzerland. And despite the relatively simple path control that we exercise, it is a very powerful tool to achieve sovereignty and control over your data. This is relevant beyond Switzerland because we have demonstrated with SSFN that the model works, not in the lab, not in pilot, but in real life. And it shows that you can combine multi-provider resilience, strong governance, controlled connectivity, and economic efficiency in a way that is operationally viable. And that actually separates concern of network operations from application availability and application usage, similar to the way that internet does, but in a very controlled environment. And this is really the key takeaway. So technology meets then economic reliability and economic benefits in a nicely combined way and fashion. This is the real thing that energizes me around Scion and the real-life networks that we have here.
Before we leave, I want to remind you that we have a great Scion Day coming up on the 27th of October. We will have a great opening keynote by UBS with Sergio Ermotti. Going back to the ROI, once again, we invite you to get in touch if you want to get a more personalized cost analysis, also be able to tweak the numbers to really suit your use case. We invite you to reach out to our members, Anapaya and Eraneos. And if you need any know-how, if you want to know more about the governance and the processes that were used to build up the SSFN, then Six and Fritz are very happy to help and contribute with their massive know-how and expertise in rolling out Scion. With that said, I wish everybody a great day and a great moving into the weekend.